Okay, thank you. Welcome back. I invite our speakers to turn on their microphones, and videos will soon start the Q&A session. Thank you very much for the rich presentations. I will encourage our participants to submit their questions if you have any, and to take up these opportunities. And while you're thinking about your questions, we have a couple of questions here to get the conversation going. So first question is related to research, and it's been mentioned several times in your presentations. There are a lot of unknowns and a lot of work to be done. With the limited amount of research evidence to hand and the limited funds for research, would some prioritization of research to help focus on some key important issues or specific SDGs to be warranted? And if so, which SDGs and why? While you're formulating your answers, I would like to say a few words about terminology. So C2G, we use a solar radiation modification, which is being used by the latest report of IPCC. But of course, it's often referred as solar radiation management, geoengineering, and solar geoengineering. So yeah, that's a kind of a clarification. So we are on the same page. So first question. Want to have a go?
Okay, I can start. Basically, what Holly mentioned very clear, there are several SDGs that are associated with the climate geoengineering, and also the sustainability of our future society depends on the implementation of the SDGs. So basically, two of them are very important. The first one is, of course, to stabilize the climate in the planet, to fight climate change. That is one of the most challenging issues the governments have to do right now. And the second one is associated with to provide the safe water for the population. So basically, several of the potential geoengineering techniques could affect significantly the water cycle, especially in tropical countries, especially in developing countries. And of course, research on these two topics are extremely important, especially again for developing countries.
Thank you, Paulo. Anyone wants to step in?
Holly, do you want to? Or
yeah.
I can go second. Or...
Go ahead, Matthias.
I mean, my short answer would be specifically all of them, but that's a bit too easy. So I'll give reasons for perhaps additionally SDG 2, which is related to food production. And so there's big uncertainties what happens to food crops if there's let's say a thin layer of sulfate aerosols or other types of aerosols in the stratosphere, reducing incoming sunlight and changing essentially the mix of the types of radiation coming in. So shifting away from, I believe, UV radiation and more towards visible light, but also within the range of visible light, it changes. And so plants respond in various ways. That on top, of course, to changes in precipitation that are to be expected. There's possibilities that precipitation is closer overall to pre-industrial, depending on how SAI, for instance, would be done, but there's also many different scenarios in which that would be very different. So those types of effects, for instance.
Great, thank you. Paulo, do you want to complement or?
Yeah, I mean, the big categories I see is water, as Paulo identified, and also ecological impacts, of which food systems is one part, but I suspect that using the same tools, you could also answer really important questions about what happens with ecosystems. And I do think that the question here isn't just about the content of the research, but the process for getting there too.
Right. Okay. We have a question to Holly. So from Ian, can we get the reference to the report you referenced on your last slide, please?
Yeah, I suspect it's on the Forum for Climate Engineering Assessment website, but I can locate it and paste it into the chat.
Okay, thank you for the quick answer. Yeah, it appears inevitable that decisions about trade-offs will be required. So could the panel say a little bit more how this might be approached?
I'll give it a go. I mean, trade-offs are universal in decisions of public policy, and they're ubiquitous also in the realm of climate policy. Of course, the magnitude of the trade-offs when we talk about global interference in the climate system is greater than, I'd say, the majority of the other policy choices that we face as an international community. And so basically, and we've alluded to this in many fora, and also the report that Holly just pasted in the chat makes reference to this. There's a need for some form of global deliberation. And obviously that's hugely challenging, as I've pointed out, with regard to poor, disadvantaged populations. There's huge inequalities in the capacities and the resource availabilities to participate in global decision-making, but it's something we need to aspire to foster. And that goes in the same realm. For me, there's a clear need for multilateral decision-making through UN processes, various governance processes, probably not just one, which inherently build on the representation of different nations, people. Yeah, that's just a partial answer. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Matthias. You mentioned some interesting points. I would like to come back later. Anyone wants to react to this question?
Yeah, there are always trade-offs. That is inevitable, you know. And the issue is to have a democratic system where the population could have a word in which is the acceptable trade-off, which is unacceptable compromise that have to be done. So basically you have to trust in the democratic system. The problem is that it needs to be global when you have strategies for global actions against climate change or in favor of geoengineering.
Okay. Let's move on. Matthias, you mentioned several UN entities which may be places where we can talk about these issues. Can any of you, just to be precise about what are those possible processes or fora that we can have this inclusive debates about those issues?
Well, in some ways, all those institutions that are in some ways concerned with some aspects of, let's say, the 17 SDGs, or all those possible effects from a change in climate and from potential climate interventions. So that's not going to be an exhaustive list, but from the top of my head, I would say, you know, the WMO, the IPCC as a science communication institution, UNEP, UNEA as a you know, a multilateral venue for discussion of upcoming challenges in the environmental realm, but also even, let's say, the General Assembly or the Security Council. There's all these places offer opportunities for serious conversations on different parts of the challenge that we're looking at. I think that's really important to emphasize. There's only different pieces that we are able to look at as we go forward, and they need to come together somehow.
Okay, seems that you all agree. Anyone wants to compliment? Okay, no, okay. Let's move on. And Paulo said that you mentioned that we need a global discussion in addition to the institutions Matthias just spoke about. Who else, according to you, should be involved now?
Yeah, of course, as well as with the climate change issue, governance is actually not science, but actually governance is the main issue in fighting climate change, and also to decide which geoengineering techniques to apply or not, you know. And right now, I think we are in a relatively better shape than a few years ago. With most of European countries and also the United States also aiming to join a global conversation for serious climate mitigation, because of course we need in addition to changing our consumption, changing our society, we need this strong global mitigation strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And unfortunately, we're not going in the right direction, because, for instance, right now, in the middle of a COVID-19 year, we are seeing the burning of fossil fuel increasing. Even with this big global recession, we see biomass burning emissions in Brazil increasing by 10% only in 2020. Last year, the increase was 34% in biomass burning emissions. So actually, we have a very long way to go to mitigate emissions as soon as possible. And as Matthias mentioned, you know, UNEP, the UN General Assembly, will have to put his feet on this critical and very urgent issue.
Who wants to react? Yeah. Okay, so my next question is about participation. Some of you mentioned the inclusiveness, importance of inclusiveness discussion of this issue. Today, much of the SRM debates are taking place in the global north. How can the debate be widened out to ensure those whom the SDG will have greatest benefits are brought into the debate and their interests protected?
I could maybe start here. I think that this is a really unusual moment in that we have technologies that make it easier than ever to speak to one another and to engage with these issues. We have this Zoom lifestyle now. We don't have to find the finances to travel to a meeting in another country. And at the same time, the very same technological platforms have been increasing polarization, reducing nuance. So there's those two tendencies. We're really just not taking advantage of the medium we have for something like a nuanced global participatory discussion on SRM. So what do we do about that? I'm not sure. It's going to require society-wide transformations in how we use these technologies, which may or may not be quick. But I do think that a near-term thing is to engage through institutions of science and higher education, which exists to some various degrees in every country, and build on those relationships, because it's one area where they're strongest and one area where you can take some time for a discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, engaging the Global South is the important issue to be done on this discussion. And how that can be done is not a very easy issue, because most of the countries are first involved in to fulfill their Paris Agreement commitments. And most of the countries are actually pretty bad on that task yet, you know. So because of lack of financial incentives, lack of transfer of technology for the global south and so on. But we have to deal with all issues in parallel, of course, and discussing the governance of a future climate is absolutely strategic for all the global south countries to join the global north in this discussion, in parallel with mitigating emissions that is crucial in this discussion.
Matthias?
Yeah, just a quick addition on that. I think as academics in some way or another, we all know about the challenges of getting funding to do research, broadly speaking, getting a career secured. And those challenges are probably even bigger in many developing countries, where there's so many pressing issues that need attention of researchers and experts. And so in my view, it's really also a responsibility of countries in the global north who have larger research budgets to go out and launch collaborative research initiatives which span across borders and involve young researchers and upcoming academics in the global south, and enable them to engage in this space. And that's really, it sounds pretty simple, but it's not been done in this space. And I think it's a shame. It's something that has been holding back a lot of really promising capacity in the global south. Holly mentioned the Decimals Fund initiated by the SRMGI. That's, to my knowledge, presently really the only initiative of that type, and it's astounding to me that governments in the global north have not done more in this.
Thank you, Matthias. That's indeed a big issue. We C2GL so wants to contribute to this to solving this problem and bringing more people from the global south to the discussion. Apparently, there's a lot of work to be done, and we hope that this message can get out soon. So talking about governance, we have a question coming in. Good question. The current governance architecture is clearly insufficient, or we would not be in the mess we are in. Should we not be approaching governance and its architecture differently? Any thoughts?
Yeah, the question is, which is this different way of dealing with that? You know, countries are not very creative in actually dealing with the global issues. We see the COVID-19, where every individual country does whatever it likes. Sometimes within the countries, every municipality or every state do completely different things from your neighbor. So actually, the countries need to find better creative ways to deal with the issues that affect them strongly, like the COVID-19 pandemic, but also climate change and also climate geoengineering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My following question is related to this. Should we think about creating something new in addition to the existing processes of our any thought?
I guess in some academic conversations, there's that sense that there is a need for some, let's say, government experimentation. I'm of the view that there's a lot of existing elements for the governance of SRM that are completely underutilized and not yet really, the potential of which isn't yet really recognized. And that's, like I said, all those institutions that are dealing in some form or another with some aspect, let's say, of the SDGs that is touched by climate change and its effects. To me, all those institutions have a degree of responsibility to address this and to, to engage in those questions. And even that low-level engagement and examination, what does this topic mean for, let's say, our organization, our mandate? Already that, in my view, is a part of that governance in a big, in a broad sense, right? I mean, governance isn't just deciding on laws and international norms. It starts much earlier. It starts in those conversations where secretariats of UN organizations recognize aspects of relevance to their mission and start, engaging with the parties on those topics, and thus prepare essentially the ground for global decision making on that.
Thank you, Matthias. So just a reminder, we have about 10 minutes left. If any participant wants to ask a question, please do so. Here, I have another question here. Some have suggested a new global law of the atmosphere, which is required to govern SRM. Might this create a silo for SRM governance, distancing it from other agenda and frustrate the capacity to effectively deliver the SDGs? Because when we talk about SDG, well, we think about SRM in the context of SDGs. One of the ideas to break silos. So yeah, and any thoughts on this question, on this idea of a new global law of the atmosphere?
I'm not too sure what that law would entail, so I can't speak very well on it, but I do feel that I would have that concern about the siloing. For example, I think that the oceans have generally been left out too much of this type of discussion. And so, where would that put the oceanographers that we need to really understand what SRM would do? I mean, there are all these different spheres that the intervention would impact, so.
Yeah, answering directly the question, the answer is yes. We need a new global law, but not only for the atmosphere. We need a global law for fighting biodiversity loss. We need a global law for the oceans, like Holly mentioned, So actually, we need global governance very, very urgently, not just for the atmosphere. Of course, the atmosphere is an important aspect because it's a natural resource that is shared between all of us all the time. Every oxygen molecule we are breathing right now was already in the nose of thousands or millions of peoples in Africa, Greenland, China, and so on, and Brazil. So basically, it's a natural resource that is shared by all of us. So of course, it's very urgent that this global law be established. The question is not this. The need is very clear. The question is, do countries will allow to lose their sovereignty over natural resources from each country easily, or countries will stick with whatever they want to do in terms of put garbage in the atmosphere, garbage in the oceans, and so on. So are you going to be civilized or not? Are you going to treat the atmosphere as a shared natural resource that needs to be respected by all 7.7 billion people in the planet or not? So this is the main question. And for this question, we still, unfortunately, do not have any clear answer.
I can just comment on that again. I also think that generally one of the problems with our climate policy paradigm and with net zero as a framing is that we're still thinking about emissions and emissions reduction and carbon is the logic, where I think we should be focusing also on production of fossil fuels and phasing out production. And so the emissions part is taking attention away from what we might need a global agreement on, managed decline around the world, or a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, as some people have suggested. So if there's an atmosphere law, I would also be similarly concerned that it places the emphasis farther down the pipeline.
Okay. So Matthias, you don't want to step in?
I mean, I can take up Holly's point here. I mean, one way to think about the problem we have with climate change is it's a pollution problem. So I guess that's taking the opposite of what Holly just said, to say, well, if we treated the atmosphere the way that we treat our streets, let's say, where clearly you're not allowed to litter, you're not allowed to dump your trash out of the window into the street. And if we did the same with the atmosphere, that would also work. So, I mean, there's different ways to think about this problem. I agree that, especially if we look to coal as a fuel for electricity, that's a place where we can see that challenge play out in so far that you need, a holistic thinking in managing the transition away from coal production, where entire regions are dependent on that as an economic activity. And you need to think about this transition as a societal problem, and not just as a climate problem that comes at the end of your economic production chain. So there, I think I could see Holly's point as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And of course, this part of our conversation is just to emphasize the importance of tackling the emissions of greenhouse gases in the first place before seriously thinking about potential deployment of solar radiation modification.
Sure. I personally think that the idea of pollution, air pollution, is also particularly relevant to carbon removal, which is another area that C2G is working on, but not the main topic of our session today. But we are close to the end of the session. I would like to ask each of you to give a few last words, about 1 minute each, and something we must take away from today's discussion. Paulo, maybe I can start with you.
Okay, I can start. Basically, I think this discussion makes it very clear that humanity have not other alternative than follow up the SDGs and build up a sustainable socioeconomic system, because our system right now, with this COVID-19, with the crisis in the biodiversity and with the crisis, the climate emergency, shows that this is not sustainable. We cannot stay like this forever, and even for a few years. So the urgent issues with the health crisis, biodiversity, and climate is becoming more and more and more clear. But our governments are not waking up for these emergencies, and I hope that we have to work as a whole society to shaking up the governments for them to do their task, that is to build up a sustainable planet. And this is possible. This can be done. We have the financial and intellectual resources to do it, but we need the decisions to start to implement this as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's hard to say it better than Paulo just said it. I mean, yes, to everything you just said. And I think it takes all of us and all our best efforts, also in pressuring the governments all over the world in doing their part. Yeah, I mean, I think SDGs 16 and 17 are crucial. We need global partnerships for the goals, and we need stable institutions, strong institutions, and we need to work across silos, as we've said earlier as well. Yeah, so in that spirit, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's very clear how vast the research gaps are here, and I hope that states and philanthropists and NGOs and institutions of higher education can all step up and fund research in the Global South that builds capacity in the Global South. It's really important. We need to be doing it right now.
Okay, thank you so much. With that, I would like to bring our discussion close to a closure. I do think it's an insightful and useful discussion. I hope that has been for a useful discussion for you. To our participants, you can this video, the recording of this session will be made available online. You can find further resources on this topic and other topics on our website, or by signing up for our newsletter. Also, please complete the post-event survey to help us improve our future events. Lastly, I would like to say a huge thank you to you three distinguished speakers, to my colleagues who are here today, and to all of you for watching and taking part in this webinar. With that said, I would like to end today's event. Bye-bye.